And we are set.
Hi, folks. Thanks so much for tuning in and for bearing with us through some technical difficulties. Today, we're going to talk about Food and Water Watch's new research about the impact industrial agriculture is having on New Mexico's worsening water crisis. My name is Chrissy Kasserman, and I'm Food and Water Watch's Factory Farm Organizing Director. I'm joined by my colleagues Amanda Starbuck, our Research Director, and Emily Miller, our staff attorney. We don't have to tell you that New Mexico and the entire American Southwest are facing a climate-induced mega drought. Experts have described the drought as the second worst in the past 1,200 years. New Mexico has the worst outlook for water scarcity in the entire country, and dire predictions about this year's lack of snowmelt will only further exacerbate this situation. The drought has made everyday life exceedingly difficult for people across New Mexico, even forcing some to abandon their homes. And while the impacts this mega drought is having on New Mexico's people and communities are only worsening, New Mexico's agricultural industry is using the vast majority of fresh water in the state, more than 80%, according to our new research. We'll start with Amanda. Amanda, can you please say more about the impact industrial agriculture has on New Mexico's water supply?
Yes, thank you, Chrissy. Yeah, so intensive industrial practices are both competing with other water uses in New Mexico while also contributing to climate change. So when it comes to water use, as you mentioned, more than 80% of New Mexico's freshwater is being used for agriculture alone. And this includes some pretty water-intensive production systems that really don't make sense in a semi-arid climate. Alfalfa, for example, uses more water than any other crop in New Mexico. Alfalfa is a notoriously water-thirsty crop that is almost entirely reliant on irrigation. It's used to feed cows on Megadairies and other industrial operations. But surprisingly, almost a third of all of New Mexico's alfalfa is actually exported out of state, and sometimes even out of the country, to support Megadairies in places as far away as China and Saudi Arabia. And in turn, we know that these Megadairies and other factory farms emit greenhouse gases that fuel climate change. Today, New Mexico has half as many smaller family-scale dairies than it did 20 years ago. Those smaller pasture-based farms can help animals graze naturally and reduce the reliance on purchased feed. But the rise in Megadairies is both pushing these family farms to the brink of extinction while also significantly increasing climate emissions.
Thanks, Amanda. So we know that New Mexico's Megadairies confine 336,000 cows. Can you specifically address the impact that these Megadairies have on water quality and quantity?
Absolutely. So Megadairies themselves consume enormous amounts of water. So we estimate that it takes about 32 million gallons of water every day just to maintain those dairy cars that you mentioned on New Mexico's factory farms. And that's just water to water the cows and clean the equipment. It's not the additional water footprint that goes into feeding livestock feed, such as alfalfa. And plus, because there are larger amounts of animals living in confinement, they produce more manure than can sustainably be absorbed on the surrounding farmland. Again, this is another key difference between pasture-based and family-scale farms, where animals can graze naturally and their manure can enrich the soil. Instead, manure is stored and later disposed of in large quantities, and that threatens our water resources. So we estimate that New Mexico's Megadairies together produce enough manure to overflow 9 Olympic swimming pools each day. And this is posing serious threats to New Mexico's drinking water.
9 Olympic-sized swimming pools each day. That is a lot of manure and a very scary threat to New Mexico's remaining freshwater supplies. Thanks so much, Amanda. Next, I'll turn to Emily. Emily, what is the state of New Mexico doing to address the impact the dairy industry has on its water resources?
Well, in short, not much. First off, New Mexico grants livestock watering rights pretty much automatically without consideration of whether doing so runs counter to water conservation or the public interest. But more than that, New Mexico's general water policy is to allow as much water as possible to be put to beneficial use every year. So the state has essentially devised a water system where water users must use all of the water that they've been allocated. And if they don't, they'll lose the right to use it in the future. So this use it or lose it type mentality really drives the industry to overuse water. And it also completely ignores the drought situation and the fact that water supply will only continue to decrease as the drought condition worsens and climate change exacerbates that. Another issue is that the state fails to distinguish between certain beneficial uses of water over others. So in times of drought, like we're in now, there's no effort to prioritize truly beneficial uses like drinking water, essential for human life and well-being. So water use that really only serves to enrich corporate profits and prop up an unsustainable agricultural system are essentially deemed just as important.
It is truly unbelievable that New Mexico doesn't prioritize drinking water for people over corporate profits, especially during a water crisis as significant as that the state is now facing. So how about when it comes to water quality? Are Megadairies subject to any environmental regulations in this area?
Technically, yes. New Mexico dairies are subject to the Federal Clean Water Act, which aims to protect surface waters from industrial pollution. The state of New Mexico also has a groundwater discharge program that requires dairies as well as other industrial polluters to get permits in order to engage in activities that are likely to cause groundwater contamination. But in practice, there is very little in the way of actual oversight or accountability for the industry. So for instance, only about 20 of the state's 180 large dairies are currently permitted under the Clean Water Act. And when it comes to groundwater, the New Mexico Department of Environment has a pattern of approving and renewing discharge permits, even when it knows that dairies are contributing to groundwater contamination. And I think it's important to keep in mind that groundwater is the main drinking water source for New Mexicans, and it becomes more and more depleted with each passing drought year. So given this reality, New Mexico really can't afford to be handing out licenses to pollute like it's doing.
So it sounds like New Mexico's Department of Environment is what you just said, issuing permits to pollute with the full knowledge that that pollution may directly or indirectly impact New Mexico's water. So we also know that New Mexico's state engineer has recently resigned. Have we learned anything from that resignation?
Yeah, so for a long time, water policy has been severely underfunded and underprioritized in New Mexico. And most recently, that is what led to the resignation of the state's top water official. I think this is really just one more indication that New Mexico's water system is long overdue for a major overhaul. The state really needs to take a hard look at how industries like dairy have used and abused their water rights. And they need to put policies in place to make sure that these factory farms stop overusing and polluting state waters.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Emily. Amanda, to close us out, can you review the recommendations we've made in this new research to address these issues we've discussed today?
Yeah, absolutely. So to build off what Emily was saying, there's a few things that New Mexico can do to tackle this problem. So first, the New Mexico Drought Task Force can update New Mexico's drought plan to include mandatory drought response and mitigation actions that are specific to the megadairy industry and their threat that they pose to water supply and quality. Second, the Office of State Engineer, which oversees water allocation, should prevent the wasteful use of water for factory farming. They could prioritize truly beneficial water uses, those that are essential to life and human well-being over those that merely serve to enrich corporate profits. Finally, the New Mexico Environment Department should use its existing authority to hold polluters accountable. This would mean rejecting groundwater discharge permits and renewals to dairies that are discharging into highly contaminated aquifers, and also terminating permits of those repeat violators. And in times of extreme drought, the Environment Department should deny all groundwater discharge permits by dairies on the grounds that any contamination poses a threat when drinking water sources are overdrawn.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks so much to all of you for joining us, and thanks to Amanda and Emily for sharing more about this new research. It's now even more clear that officials in New Mexico must take urgent action to address the unsustainable strain of factory farming on the state's increasingly scarce water supplies. We hope you'll take a look at this groundbreaking new research. We're going to put a link to it up on the screen now. Thank you again for joining us, and be sure to check back for updates and ways that you can take action to protect New Mexico's water.